The in media res crisis. The moment Han Joon-woo pulled out the chair and sat down with calm certainty, Olivia Coleman knew the man she had been waiting for was never coming. But it wasn't until this stranger leaned forward, his presence carrying an unmistakably powerful authority, that she realized her life was about to change forever. "He isn't coming," he said gently, his voice carrying a weight she couldn't explain. Olivia should have walked away then. She should have gathered her pride, ignored the tear slipping down her cheek and left table 12 behind. But something in his steady, strangely kind eyes made her breath hitch. Have you ever been so broken that your body just freezes? That's what happened to Olivia in that moment. Before we go any further, if you're already feeling Olivia's heartbreak, hit that like button and drop a comment. Should she trust this mysterious stranger or walk away? And don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you'll want to see who Han Joon-woo really is. Now, let me tell you how a shattered engagement turned into the most powerful moment of Olivia's life. 3 hours earlier, Olivia had been perfectly content with the promise of forever. She had been sitting in this elegant restaurant, eyes locked on the empty chair, holding on to a belief that was slowly becoming her weakness. Her hand trembled as she raised 3 fingers. 3 hours late, 3 calls unanswered, 3 promises shattered. Olivia was a woman who believed in loyalty, but as the candle burned low between untouched plates, she realized she had given that belief to the wrong person. She had told herself that if he didn't come after 3 hours, she would walk away. She arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, never imagining that an empty chair would become the seat of her destiny. The velvet chair at table 12 felt colder now, a stark contrast to the memory of the night Marcus had first promised her forever. Olivia closed her eyes, and the elegant buzz of the restaurant faded, replaced by the salt-kissed air of a terrace in Savannah 2 years ago. Marcus had taken her hand then, his voice a low, steady anchor that she had built her entire world around. "Olivia," he had whispered, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger as a placeholder for the diamond to come, "I will never make you wait for the life you deserve. Wherever we go, I'll be there before you even arrive." It had been a promise of punctuality, of presence, of a devotion that felt as permanent as the architecture she loved to photograph. For 3 years, Marcus was the man who anticipated her needs before she spoke them. He was the one who encouraged her to take the assignment in Seoul, promising that no distance could ever outrun his commitment. "Go," he'd urged, "document the world through your lens, and when the time is right, I'll meet you at the finish line with a ring that matches the brilliance of your talent." Every text, every late-night call across time zones had been a brick in the wall of her belief. She remembered the way he looked at her during their final dinner in Atlanta, eyes full of a soft, deceptive light that she had mistaken for absolute truth. He had promised this very night would be the culmination of every sacrifice, the moment the placeholder became a forever. Now the unopened ring box on the table was a silent, mocking witness to the death of that belief. She had arrived 15 minutes early, her heart racing with the anticipation of a woman about to be claimed. She had even checked her reflection in the gilded mirrors, smoothing her hair and adjusting her dress, convinced that Marcus would be walking through the door at any moment with that familiar, confident stride. But as the first hour passed, the forever he promised began to feel like a fraying thread. By the second hour, the salt in her tears tasted like the Savannah air, but without the hope. By the third, as she raised those 3 trembling fingers, she realized that Marcus hadn't just missed a flight or a meeting. He had abandoned the very foundation of who he claimed to be. The man who promised her the world had left her with nothing but an empty chair and a candle that was slowly burning out. The restaurant buzzed softly with evening elegance, but Olivia Coleman sat frozen in silence. It was a vibrant living organism of clinking crystal, low-register laughter, and the scent of expensive truffle oil, yet Olivia felt as though she were trapped beneath a bell jar where the air was running out. Her eyes stayed locked on the empty chair across from her, the one meant for the man who promised forever. At first, her heart had been a frantic bird against her ribs, fluttering with the nervous energy of anticipation. She had checked her phone every 30 seconds, convinced that a stuck in traffic, or just pulling up, message was only moments away. But as the first hour bled into the second, the frantic energy turned into a dull, throbbing ache. Around her, the world continued with a cruel, polished indifference. At table 10, a young couple celebrated a promotion with a boisterous toast. At table 14, a family shared a dessert platter, their easy joy acting as a jagged contrast to the quiet heartbreak unfolding at table 12. Laughter continued, indifferent to her struggle, while the staff's initial warmth began to cool into a professional pity that felt heavier than outright rudeness. The waiter had already stopped asking if she was still expecting someone, his frequent water refills becoming silent markers of her humiliation. Olivia felt the weight of every sympathetic glance from the host and every whispered observation from the neighboring tables. To the rest of the room, she was a tragedy in a cocktail dress, a cautionary tale of a woman who had believed too much. Her hand trembled as she raised 3 fingers, a desperate, silent count of the time she had surrendered to a ghost. 3 hours late. 3 calls unanswered. 3 promises shattered. Each finger was a monument to a different lie Marcus had told her, a different year of her life she would never get back. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the glow of the candle between untouched plates. The wax had begun to pool and spill over the silver holder, much like her own composure was beginning to leak through the cracks of her dignity. She looked down at the unopened ring box, its velvet surface mocking her under the ambient light. It was supposed to be the anchor of her new life. Instead, it was the tombstone of her old one. She had arrived 15 minutes early, her natural hair pulled back in a puff, wearing her best dress and her highest hopes. Now she was just a woman waiting for a man who didn't intend to arrive. The seat remained empty, a void that seemed to grow wider with every tick of the restaurant's grandfather clock, until a shadow finally fell over the table. The shadow fell over table 12 with the weight of an approaching storm, cold and absolute. Olivia didn't look up immediately, her gaze still anchored to the flickering candle flame that seemed to be gasping its final breaths. She expected the waiter again, offering a final pitying check before asking her to surrender the prime real estate of a windowside table. Instead, the air around her suddenly changed, growing pressurized and still, as if the bustling restaurant had been muted by a heavy velvet curtain. A man in a tailored dark suit pulled out the chair and sat down with a calm certainty that made the floor feel more solid beneath her feet. Olivia blinked in confusion, her vision blurred by the drying salt on her lashes. "Excuse me, someone is sitting there," she managed, her voice a thin, fragile thread that threatened to snap. She gestured vaguely toward the empty space, still clinging to the ghost of Marcus as if he might materialize out of thin air if she just believed hard enough. But the stranger didn't flinch. His presence carried a quiet, unmistakable authority, controlled, observant, and so powerfully grounded that it made her own world of trembling hands and unanswered calls feel like a distant, fading dream. The stranger's gaze moved briefly, scanning the untouched wine, the unopened ring box that sat like a small velvet tombstone, and finally her tear-stained face. He didn't look at her with the professional pity of the staff or the voyeuristic curiosity of the other diners. His eyes were dark, sharp as broken glass, yet they held a strange, unexpected kindness that pinned her in place. "He isn't coming," he said gently. The words weren't a question. They were a verdict delivered with a certainty that made her chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. "You don't know that," she whispered, her defense a reflex of a heart that wasn't ready to stop breaking. She wanted to fight him, to demand how a stranger could dare to walk into the ruins of her evening and declare the war over. But the man simply watched her, his expression unreadable and steady. "I know men who intend to arrive," he replied, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive, "and men who don't." She looked away, embarrassed by the fresh tears that escaped her control, but he didn't look away from her. He pushed a napkin toward her, careful and respectful, never crossing the invisible line of a stranger's comfort, yet offering a bridge out of her isolation. "Belief is not weakness," he said quietly, his words sinking into her like a truth she had forgotten. "Giving it to the wrong person is." Olivia stared at the white linen napkin resting on the table, its crisp edge a stark boundary between her crumbling world and this man's composed reality. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried an intentionality that made her feel seen rather than merely watched. The restaurant's noise, the clinking of silver against porcelain and the distant melodic piano, seemed to retreat, leaving them in a private pocket of silence. Han Joon-woo didn't reach out to touch her hand or offer empty platitudes. Instead, he maintained a respectful distance, never crossing the invisible line of a stranger's comfort. She picked up the napkin, the fabric cool against her skin as she dabbed at the tears that had betrayed her dignity. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice still thick with the residue of her 3-hour vigil. She looked at him, searching for the catch, the hidden motive that usually accompanied such bold intrusions. But Joon-woo's gaze remained steady and unreadable, though strangely kind. There was a stillness in him that Olivia found both intimidating and grounding, a stark contrast to the chaotic abandonment Marcus had left in his wake. "I dislike seeing belief wasted," he said quietly, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. He adjusted his posture slightly, the movement revealing the flawless cut of his dark suit, yet his focus remained entirely on her. "There is a specific kind of silence that follows a broken promise. It doesn't belong in a place like this." Olivia felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck as she realized how public her heartbreak had been. She had spent 3 hours raising 3 fingers to the air, a desperate signal to a man who had already turned his back. Yet Joon-woo didn't treat her like a spectacle. His presence acted as a shield, a silent declaration to the prying eyes of Table 10 and the pitying glances of the staff that she was no longer alone. She lowered her gaze to her untouched wine, the red liquid shimmering under the candlelight. The invisible line he drew was not one of coldness, but of deep, unsaid respect, a boundary that allowed her to be vulnerable without feeling small. For the first time since she had arrived 15 minutes early, the tightness in her chest began to loosen, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the shadow that had finally filled the empty seat. Olivia finally met his eyes, finding them steady, unreadable, yet strangely kind. The weight of the 3 hours she had spent in isolation seemed to evaporate under the intensity of his gaze, and for the first time that night, she felt a flicker of genuine curiosity that surpassed her own grief. She looked at the man who had reclaimed the space Marcus had abandoned, noticing the way the candlelight caught the sharp lines of his cheekbones and the impeccable silk of his tie. He sat with an ease that suggested he had never known the indignity of waiting for someone who didn't intend to arrive. "And you are?" she asked, her voice sounding clearer, bolstered by the strange grounding energy he provided. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his dark eyes sweeping over her face as if deciding how much of himself to reveal to a woman who had just been shattered in public. "Han Joon-woo," he said quietly. The name carried a weight Olivia couldn't explain, but she felt the impact of it instantly. It was as if a silent frequency had been broadcast throughout the room, altering the very molecules of the air. She noticed the subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere almost immediately. The ambient chatter of the surrounding tables didn't stop, but it became quieter, more careful, as if everyone had suddenly realized they were in the presence of something predatory and absolute. Her eyes drifted past Joon-woo's shoulder to the periphery of the room, and what she saw made her breath hitch. The waiter, who had spent the last hour offering her looks of tired pity, was now standing perfectly rigid near the kitchen entrance, his face gone remarkably pale. The floor manager, a man who had moved with practiced arrogance all evening, was suddenly more attentive, hovering at a respectful distance with his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his eyes darting toward their table with a look that was unmistakably closer to fear than respect. Olivia looked back at Han Joon-woo, realizing that the shadow that had fallen over her table was far larger than she had imagined. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, sealing them into this new, pressurized reality. She lowered her 3 raised fingers, her breathing steadying for the first time since she had arrived 15 minutes early. The realization that she was sitting across from a man who commanded the room's terror was strangely comforting. It made the rejection of Marcus feel small, a petty crime compared to the gravity of the man who had chosen to stay in his place. Han Joon-woo rose slightly to pour her a fresh drink, his movements as precise and deliberate as a calculated move on a chessboard. "Then perhaps," he said, his voice dropping to a register that made her spine stiffen with a new kind of awareness, "this is the moment your life changes." Olivia let out a small, unexpected laugh, fragile but real, as she realized that the empty chair no longer felt like a symbol of rejection. It felt like destiny rewriting her entire evening, replacing a ghost with a man of absolute authority. She reached for her clutch, her fingers finally steady, and stood up to leave table 12 behind forever. The walk through the restaurant was different from the 3 hours she had spent in agonizing isolation. As she moved beside Joon-woo, the subtle shift she had noticed earlier intensified into a wall of palpable silence. The laughter that had been so indifferent to her quiet heartbreak suddenly vanished, replaced by the hushed synchronization of a staff that deferred to Joon-woo with something closer to fear than respect. The manager didn't just nod. He bowed, his face still remarkably pale as they passed the marble countertops. Olivia didn't look back at the unopened ring box or the untouched wine. She kept her eyes locked on the broad shoulders of the man leading her out of the ruins of her old life. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of damp pavement and the soft tapping of rain against the windows. The world of evening elegance was gone, replaced by the neon-lit reality of a Seoul night that felt suddenly dangerous and electric. A black Mercedes waited at the curb, its engine purring with a low, expensive growl that matched the authority in Joon-woo's voice. The driver, a stoic man with an unreadable expression, held the door open with practiced precision, scanning the street with an alertness that suggested they were moving through a war zone rather than a quiet neighborhood. "I told myself if he didn't come after 3 hours I'd walk away," she whispered into the cool night air, her voice barely audible over the rain. Joon-woo paused at the car door, his gaze moving briefly to her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You did walk away, Olivia," he replied, his hand resting near the door in a gesture that was both protective and a silent command. "Now you are simply choosing a different destination." She stepped into the car, the scent of expensive leather and his cologne surrounding her, realizing that while the man who broke her heart never arrived, the stranger who took his seat was not letting her go. The interior of the Mercedes was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, the hum of the engine a low vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the rain against the glass. Olivia sat deep in the leather seat, her mind still tethered to the image of Table 12 and the 3 fingers she had raised in a futile plea for a life that was already gone. Beside her, Han Joon-woo remained a silhouette of calm authority, his gaze fixed on the neon-blurred streets of Seoul. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with the gravity of the name he had revealed and the subtle shift in the world that had followed it. "You're wondering about the man who didn't arrive," Joon-woo said, his voice cutting through the quiet with the precision of a scalpel. He didn't turn to look at her, but Olivia felt his attention pin her in place more effectively than any physical restraint. She tightened her grip on her clutch, the placeholder ring Marcus had given her in Savannah feeling like a lead weight on her finger. "I told you I know men who intend to arrive," he continued, finally turning to meet her eyes with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your Marcus intended to arrive. He was less than a block away when my men stopped him." Olivia's heart stuttered, the breath dying in her throat as the broken glass, in Joon-woo's eyes, seemed to reflect a truth she wasn't prepared to face. "You intercepted him?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of shock. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The 3-hour wait, the 3 unanswered calls, and the 3 shattered promises hadn't been an act of simple cowardice by Marcus, but a calculated removal by the man sitting beside her. Joon-woo reached into the pocket of his dark suit and pulled out a small, familiar object. It was a second ring box, identical to the one she had left on table 12, but this one was crushed, the velvet torn as if it had been wrenched from a desperate grip. "He didn't miss the dinner because he stopped loving you, Olivia," Joon-woo said, his tone as cold as ice. "He missed it because he was carrying something he shouldn't have, a debt to the Park family that he tried to pay using your assignment in Seoul as cover." He opened the broken box to reveal not a diamond, but a high-capacity memory drive nestled where a ring should have been. "The man who promised you forever was using you as a mule for Jindo clan data," he revealed, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "I didn't take his seat to mock your grief. I took it because the moment he involved you in his world, you became a target." Olivia stared at the broken box, the unexpected laugh from the restaurant turning into a hollow ache in her chest as she realized her belief hadn't just been given to the wrong person, it had been used as a weapon against her. The black Mercedes glided through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, eventually pulling into a subterranean entrance that felt less like a garage and more like a fortress. As the heavy security gates sealed behind them with a metallic finality, Olivia realized that the shadow Han Joon-woo cast extended far beyond the walls of a single restaurant. The air in the headquarters was pressurized and cool, smelling of ozone and expensive filtration systems, a stark contrast to the humid grief she had left at table 12. Joon-woo stepped out of the car, his presence immediately drawing a formation of men in black suits who moved with a kind of synchronization that spoke of elite military training. They didn't just greet him, they deferred to him with an absolute authority that made Olivia's spine stiffen. He didn't look back as he began to walk toward a bank of glass elevators, but his hand gestured for her to follow. A silent command that felt more like a promise of safety than a threat. As the elevator ascended, the panoramic view revealed the true scale of the boss's world. They weren't just in a corporate office. They were in a nerve center. Across dozens of monitors, Olivia saw data streams in multiple languages, satellite feeds of shipping docks in Incheon, and real-time stock tickers from London and New York. It was a global empire built on information and brutal honor. A place where business deals went through despite legal obstacles because the Kong name carried the weight of shadows. Olivia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering skyline of Seoul sprawled below her like a collection of jewels. She had spent 3 hours feeling small and discarded, but in this room the world felt manageable, even fragile. Joon-woo stood beside her, his reflection in the glass as sharp as broken glass, yet his hands remained relaxed in his pockets. "You thought your world was defined by a ring box and a photographer's portfolio," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "But the man you were with was a small player in a very large, very dangerous game." He gestured to the sprawling city below. "I run Kong Industries. We have interests in construction, real estate, import and export. Most people see the buildings. I see the foundation." Olivia realized then that she hadn't just been rescued from a bad date. She had been pulled into the center of a world that chose its heirs before they were old enough to understand the price. Han Joon-woo moved away from the window, his reflection vanishing from the glass as he walked toward a minimalist mahogany desk that seemed to anchor the entire room. He didn't offer her a seat. Instead, he stood with a quiet authority that demanded she find her own footing in this new, pressurized reality. Olivia followed him, her natural hair pulled back in a puff and her shoulders tense, still feeling the phantom weight of the 3 fingers she had raised at table 12. "You said you waited because you believed him," Joon-woo began, his voice dropping to a register that made the air in the headquarters feel even stiller. He picked up a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light with a sharp precision. "Belief is a currency, Olivia. You spent yours on a man who was already bankrupt." He poured a single glass, his movements controlled and observant. "In my world and in yours, the greatest danger is not the enemy you see, but the ally who lacks the intent to arrive." Olivia watched him, her photographer's eye catching the way the shadows defined his sharp cheekbones. "How was I supposed to know?" she asked, her voice fragile but gaining strength. "He had a ring box. He had promises." Joon-woo set the glass down with a deliberate click against the wood. "A ring is a prop. A promise is a script. You look at the frame but you miss the composition." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes, sharp as broken glass, pinning her in place. "Men who intend to arrive do not leave a trail of unanswered calls or 3-hour silences. They do not allow the woman they value to become a spectacle of pity for a restaurant staff." He gestured to the monitors displaying his global interests in construction and real estate. "In business, if a partner is 15 minutes late without word, the deal is dead before they walk through the door. It signals a lack of control, a lack of respect, and a hidden agenda." He looked at her tear-stained face, his expression unreadable yet strangely kind. "Marcus was never late, Olivia. He was absent. He was a man playing a game where you were the prize he was willing to lose." Olivia lowered her gaze, the truth of his words sinking in like a cold realization. She had been so absorbed in the forever Marcus had staged that she had ignored the shift in the atmosphere, the careful quiet that preceded his betrayal. Han Joon-woo had taken the empty seat not just to fill a void, but to show her that true power lies in the certainty of presence. "Don't ever wait for a ghost again," he said quietly, his hand turning to offer her the glass. "The moment you realize someone doesn't intend to arrive, you walk away. That is how you survive." The heavy silence of the penthouse was shattered by the sound of the service elevator's chime, a sharp, mechanical intrusion into the pressurized world Han Joon-woo had built around Olivia. Olivia stood by the mahogany desk, her fingers still tracing the cool rim of the crystal glass as the door slid open. She expected more men in suits or perhaps another global report. She did not expect to see Marcus. He looked nothing like the man who had promised her forever in Savannah. The confident stride was gone, replaced by a frantic, stumbling gait that made him look small against the clean lines of the foyer. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were wide with a terror that Olivia had only ever seen in her own reflection at table 12. Two of Joon-woo's guards held him by the arms, their grip firm and immovable. Olivia. Thank God, Marcus gasped, his voice cracking as he saw her. He tried to lunge toward her, but the guards anchored him in place with a synchronized precision that made Olivia's skin prickle. Tell them, Olivia. Tell them I'm here for you. I was coming to the restaurant, I swear. Olivia looked at him, her gaze as sharp as broken glass, and felt a hollow ache where her belief used to be. She saw the sweat on his brow and the way he couldn't meet her eyes, and she realized Marcus wasn't looking at her for love. He was looking for a shield. Han Joon-woo didn't move from his desk, his presence carrying a quiet, unmistakable authority that seemed to drain the air from Marcus's lungs. You were coming for the data drive, Marcus, Joon-woo said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. He didn't raise his tone, but the words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Marcus slumped, his legs giving way until he was nearly kneeling on the expensive marble floor. I had no choice, Marcus sobbed, his eyes darting toward Joon-woo in a plea for mercy. The Park family, they said they'd ruin me. I owe Kong Industries more than I can ever pay. I thought if I could just get the Jindo data to them, the debt would be wiped. He looked back at Olivia, his expression a mask of desperate regret. I never meant to hurt you, Liv. I just needed to survive. Olivia watched the man she had waited 3 hours for, the man she had raised 3 fingers in tears for, and realized he had never intended to arrive for her. He was a man playing a game where her safety was the currency he had already spent. The shadow of her past had finally reappeared, not as a hero, but as a debtor begging for his life at the feet of the man who had actually stayed. The air in the penthouse remained thick with the scent of Marcus's desperation and the underlying metallic edge of the rain outside. Han Joon-woo didn't look at the man sobbing on his floor. His focus was entirely on Olivia, his dark eyes studying her with the same unnerving intensity he had used to solve the puzzle of her heartbreak at table 12. He stepped away from the mahogany desk, moving with a controlled grace that made the guards tighten their grip on Marcus instinctively. You see him for what he is now, Joon-woo said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. A man who used your stubborn belief as a shield for his own cowardice. He stopped just inches from Olivia, his presence creating a pressurized field of quiet authority. But Marcus was right about one thing. You are collateral damage because of the data he tried to hide in your life. The Park family and the Jindo clan don't care about your innocence. They only care about the link. He gestured to the sprawling global monitors behind him, the glowing icons of Kong Industries' real estate and construction interests shimmering in the dim light. I told you I keep my promises, Olivia. I said I would keep you safe, and I will. He paused, his expression unreadable yet strangely kind. But there is a difference between being a guest under protective custody and being an ally. I don't need another victim in this penthouse. I need someone with the brutal honor to stand beside me while I dismantle the people who tried to use you. Joon-woo leaned closer, the scent of his cologne mixing with the sterile air of the headquarters. I am offering you a role in my empire. Not as a secretary and certainly not as a placeholder. I want you to use that photographer's eye of yours, the part of you that observes, analyzes and acts, to help me manage the visual narrative of this war. He extended his hand, his grip firm and warm, a silent challenge to her stubborn spirit. I will compensate you enough to never worry about rent or clients again, he promised, echoing the deal he once offered in another safe house. But in return you stay. You become my supposed alliance, my partner in this charade, until I neutralize every threat Marcus brought to your door. Olivia looked at his hand and then at the broken man on the floor. The choice was clear. She could remain the woman who waited for a ghost, or she could become a woman of power in a world that chose her before she could choose it. She reached out and took his hand, her breathing steadying as she committed to the chaos. The sky over Seoul had finally surrendered, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the neon city into a blurred masterpiece of light and shadow. Olivia stood on the edge of the corporate plaza, the cold rain soaking through her silk dress, but she didn't seek cover. Beside her, Han Joon-woo held a black umbrella, its canopy a small, private shield against the storm. He didn't speak, but his presence was a heavy, grounding force as a car door opened a few yards away. Marcus stepped out, flanked by 2 of Joon-woo's men. He looked diminished, his expensive suit clinging to his frame like a second, shameful skin. As he approached, the arrogant light in his eyes had been completely extinguished, replaced by a hollow regret that Olivia finally saw for what it was. The mourning of a man who had lost his leverage, not his love. "Liv, please," Marcus started, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic drumming of the rain. He reached out, his hand trembling, but Olivia didn't flinch. She simply watched him, her photographer's eye noting the way the rain-washed light hit the sharp angles of his face, revealing every crack in his facade. "You told me that no distance could outrun your commitment," Olivia said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the noise of the storm. "But you didn't even make it across a single street in Seoul before you traded me for a debt. I was trapped. I did it to keep you safe in the long run," he pleaded, the lie tasting of desperation. Olivia took a step closer, moving out from the safety of Joon-woo's umbrella. She felt the rain drench her hair, the coldness a sharp reminder of the 3 hours she had spent frozen at table 12. "You didn't do it for me, Marcus. You did it because you were a man playing a script and I was just the prop you used to sell the scene." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the placeholder ring from Savannah, the gold dull under the gray sky. "You said belief wasn't weakness. You were right. But giving it to you was a mistake I finally corrected." She let the ring fall. It didn't make a sound as it vanished into the rushing water of the gutter. Marcus stared at the spot where it disappeared, his shoulders slumping in final, absolute defeat. Olivia turned back toward the man who had stayed. Han Joon-woo tilted the umbrella, once again drawing her back into his pressurized circle of quiet authority. He didn't offer words of comfort. He offered the silent respect of a man who knew that some fires had to burn everything down before something real could be built in the ashes. As they walked toward the waiting car, the rain continued to wash away the ruins of her old life, leaving only the sharp, electric reality of the destiny she had finally chosen. The penthouse office was quiet, the only sound the distant rhythmic hum of the city breathing below. Han Joon-woo stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the reflection of the Seoul skyline shimmering in the glass like a sea of fallen stars. Olivia approached him slowly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The confrontation with Marcus had left her hollowed out, but in that emptiness, a new, sharper clarity had begun to take root. She looked at Joon-woo's back, at the sharp, tailored lines of his suit that seemed to hold the weight of the world with ease. "You knew exactly what Marcus was carrying," she said quietly, her voice no longer trembling. "And you knew exactly where I would be sitting." Joon-woo didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders relax a fraction. "I told you I know men who intend to arrive," he replied, his voice a low vibration that seemed to anchor the room. "But I also know the people they intend to use." He finally turned, his dark eyes, sharp as broken glass, meeting hers with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "I didn't sit at table 12 by chance, Olivia. And I didn't find you tonight because of a debt Marcus owed me." He walked toward the mahogany desk and picked up a small leather-bound portfolio. He slid it across the polished surface toward her. Olivia opened it, her breath catching as she saw her own work. Photos she had taken in the street markets of Myeongdong, the high-rise architecture of Gangnam, and the weathered hands of street vendors she had documented over the last 3 months. "I've been watching your work for a long time," he confessed, his tone smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "Long before Marcus decided to play his desperate game. Your eye for the truth, for the authentic detail in a city full of masks. It's rare. I wanted to meet the woman behind the lens, but Marcus was always the shadow in the frame." Olivia looked from the photos to the man standing before her. The realization hit her with more force than the rain outside. The random stranger who had rescued her from public humiliation had actually been the silent architect of her transition into his world. He hadn't just taken an empty seat. He had waited for the chair to be vacated. "You waited for him to fail," she whispered, a fragile but real understanding dawning on her. "I waited for you to see him clearly," Joon-woo corrected, stepping into her space, never crossing the invisible line but commanding her full attention. "I sat down because I was tired of watching you wait for a ghost. Destiny didn't rewrite this evening, Olivia. I did." In that moment, the rejection at table 12 finally transformed. It wasn't a tragedy she had survived. It was an audition she had unknowingly passed for a life that was far larger than she had ever dared to imagine. 6 months had passed since the rain-soaked pavement of Seoul had swallowed the last remnants of Olivia's former life. The transition had not been a quiet one. It was a metamorphosis forged in the pressurized corridors of Kong Industries and tempered by the brutal honor Han Joon-woo had promised. Olivia stood at the head of the boardroom table on the top floor of the headquarters, the panoramic view of the city now a familiar backdrop rather than an intimidating spectacle. She no longer wore the fragile hope of a woman waiting for a ghost. Instead, she wore a tailored suit of charcoal silk, her posture carrying a quiet, unmistakable authority that commanded the room's absolute focus. The mahogany table, once a site of Marcus's desperate pleas, was now the center of her own empire. Around her sat the directors of the Visual Enterprises division she had built from the ground up, their faces no longer reflecting pity, but a profound, synchronized respect. She didn't need to raise 3 fingers to be noticed. A single steady look from her dark eyes, now as sharp as broken glass, was enough to silence the room. She was no longer a collateral piece in someone else's game. She was the architect of the narrative, the one who analyzed, observed, and acted with a precision that even Joon-woo admired. The double doors at the end of the hall opened and Han Joon-woo entered. He didn't take the head of the table. He moved to the side, leaning against the glass with a calm certainty as he watched her conclude the briefing. The staff deferred to them both with a synchronization that spoke of a partnership that had blurred the line between performance and reality. When the room finally cleared, a comfortable, heavy silence settled between them, the kind of silence that belonged only to those who had survived the storm together. "You're late," Olivia said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive, a playful echo of the words that had first bound them at table 12. Joon-woo smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that he reserved only for her. "I knew the woman at the head of this table wouldn't wait for me if I was." He walked toward her, stopping just at the invisible line of her comfort, though that line had long since become a bridge. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, but this time he didn't sit. He waited for her to take the seat of honor. Olivia sat down, her breathing steady, her spirit no longer stubborn out of desperation but out of strength. The empty chair at table 12 had been a rejection that nearly broke her, but this seat was her destiny rewritten. As she looked out over the glittering skyline, she realized she was no longer the woman waiting for a man to arrive. She was the woman who had already arrived. The stranger who had taken a seat had stayed, and together they were no longer playing a game. They were ruling the world they had built from the ashes. Olivia's transformation from a victim of heartbreak to a woman of power highlights that we have the creative control to rewrite our own endings. Once she stopped waiting for someone else to claim her, she was able to claim her own seat of honor at the head of the table.